The wind howled through the cracked pavement of Chicago's South Side, where Marcus Tate, a man with nothing but a tattered coat and a heart full of grit, knelt beside a shivering woman, clutching a crying baby. His hands trembled as he pulled a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket, his last dollar, earned from hours of collecting cans under the city's unforgiving winter sky. "Take it," he said softly, pressing it into her hand. "Get something warm for the kid." Her eyes, wide with shock, followed him as he walked away, his thin frame disappearing into the dusk. That single dollar was his meal, his hope for the night, yet he gave it without hesitation. Little did Marcus know, a stranger in a nearby car had seen it all, a stranger whose life had once been saved by a similar act of kindness. By morning, that stranger would track Marcus down, holding a deed and a key that would change everything. Hey, hit that like and subscribe button if this story grabs you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Now let's dive into Marcus's journey, where one selfless act sparks a miracle. Marcus's story begins in the shadow of a bustling city that rarely noticed him. At 42, he'd been homeless for 3 years, ever since a factory layoff stripped away his stability. His days were a grind, scavenging for scraps, dodging icy winds, and sleeping under a bridge where the hum of traffic drowned out his thoughts. But Marcus wasn't invisible to everyone. That evening, as he gave his last dollar to a desperate mother, a man named Daniel Carter watched from his parked car. Daniel, a real estate developer who'd clawed his way up from poverty, felt a pang of recognition. Decades ago, a stranger's kindness had pulled him off the streets. Now, seeing Marcus's sacrifice, Daniel knew he had to act. He spent the night making calls, pulling strings, and by dawn, he held a deed to a small apartment and a key that gleamed with promise. Marcus, unaware of the wheels turning, woke to another freezing day, his stomach growling, his hope thin but unbroken. What happened next would prove that kindness, no matter how small, could rewrite a life. This is the story of how $1 became a home and how justice finds those who give without expecting anything in return. The last dollar Marcus Tate shuffled along the cracked sidewalk, his boots worn so thin he felt every pebble. The Chicago wind bit at his face, but he barely noticed, his eyes scanning the ground for anything salvageable, cans, bottles, maybe a dropped coin. At 42, his broad shoulders still hinted at the strength he'd had as a factory worker, but 3 years on the streets had carved lines into his face, each one a story of loss. The layoff had come first, then the eviction, then the slow unraveling of a life he'd worked hard to build. Yet Marcus never let bitterness take root. He'd learned early that kindness was the one thing no one could take from him. That evening, near a dim streetlight, he saw her, a young woman, maybe 25, cradling a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. Her face was pale, her eyes desperate as the baby wailed. "Please, anyone," she whispered to passing strangers, who hurried by without a glance. Marcus stopped. His hand slipped into his pocket, finding the crumpled dollar bill he'd earned after 6 hours of collecting cans. It was all he had, his only chance for a hot coffee or a stale donut to quiet his hunger. He looked at the baby, then the mother, and something in him stirred, a memory of his own mother, struggling alone to raise him. "Take it," he said, his voice low but steady, pressing the dollar into her hand. She stared, stunned, as he turned away, his stomach twisting but his heart oddly light. He didn't see the man in the car across the street, watching every moment, his own heart racing with a decision that would change Marcus's life forever. Life on the streets. The next morning, Marcus woke to the familiar ache of hunger and the cold seeping through his sleeping bag under the bridge. The city roared above him, indifferent to the man who'd given his last dollar the night before. He pulled his coat tighter, its seams fraying, and began his daily routine. Check the nearby dumpster, avoid the cops, maybe find a soup kitchen before the line got too long. Homelessness wasn't just a lack of walls. It was the weight of invisibility, the way people's eyes slid past him like he was part of the pavement. Once, he'd had Anne. Small apartment, a steady job at the steel plant. Co-workers who called him by name. Now his name was barely spoken, except by the few other homeless folks who shared the bridge. "You good, Marcus?" asked old Joe, a veteran who'd taught him how to survive the streets. Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "Just another day, Joe." But it wasn't just another day. Across town, Daniel Carter was already moving, his assistant pulling up property records and calling a lawyer to finalize a deed. Daniel couldn't shake the image of Marcus's quiet sacrifice, a man with nothing, giving everything. Marcus, unaware, trudged toward a shelter, hoping for a meal, his breath visible in the frosty air, his hopes stretched thin but never broken. A witness to kindness, Daniel Carter sat in his office, a sleek space overlooking Lake Michigan, but his mind was still on the South Side street corner. At 38, he'd built a real estate empire, but his own past wasn't far from Marcus's reality. As a teenager, Daniel had been homeless, sleeping in alleys until a stranger, a diner owner, gave him a job and a chance. That act had changed everything, and now, watching Marcus give his last dollar, Daniel felt the same spark. He'd followed the woman Marcus helped, learning she'd used the dollar to buy milk for her baby. That small act, so pure in its intent, hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. He called his lawyer, his voice urgent. "I need a property, something modest, furnished, ready to move in. Today." His assistant, Sarah, raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. By midnight, Daniel had the deed to a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the key in his pocket. He'd also tracked down Marcus's name through a shelter volunteer who knew him. Daniel wasn't sure why this felt so personal, but he knew one thing. Marcus deserved more than a dollar could buy. As dawn broke, Daniel set out to find him, determined to deliver a miracle born from a single act of kindness. A plan takes shape. Marcus stood in line at the Hope Street shelter, his hands stuffed in his pockets to keep warm. The smell of burnt coffee and stale bread filled the air, a small comfort in a world that offered little. He didn't know someone was looking for him, someone who saw him, not as a shadow on the street, but as a man who'd given everything. Daniel Carter drove through the city, his eyes scanning every corner, every shelter. He'd learned Marcus frequented this area, known for its soup kitchens. Daniel's plan was simple but audacious. Find Marcus, hand him the deed and key, and give him a fresh start. In his car, he clutched a folder with the paperwork, proof of ownership for a small apartment, fully paid, utilities covered for a year. He'd also arranged for a local charity to provide basic furniture and groceries. But doubt crept in. Would Marcus accept this? Would he think it was a trick? Daniel pushed the thoughts aside, remembering his own disbelief when the diner owner had offered him a chance. Meanwhile, Marcus, unaware, thanked the volunteer for a bowl of soup, his smile genuine despite the gnawing hunger. The gap between his reality and Daniel's plan was vast, but fate was about to bridge it. The gift of a home. The sun was high when Daniel spotted Marcus near a park bench, sorting through a bag of cans. Marcus's hands moved with practiced care, each can a few cents closer to survival. Daniel parked, his heart pounding, and approached, the deed and key heavy in his pocket. "Marcus Tate?" he called. Marcus looked up, wary, his eyes narrowing at the well-dressed man. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" Daniel smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Someone who saw what you did last night. That dollar you gave, it meant more than you know." Marcus frowned, confused, but Daniel pressed on, pulling out the folder. "This is for you, a deed to an apartment, yours, no strings. And this key opens the door." Marcus stared, his breath catching. The words didn't register at first. A home? After 3 years of concrete and cold? He opened the folder, his hands shaking, seeing his name on the deed. "Why me?" he whispered, tears welling. Daniel's voice softened. "Because you gave when you had nothing. Someone did that for me once. Now it's your turn." Marcus clutched the key, its weight heavier than any dollar, a symbol of hope restored. In that moment, the world shifted, and Marcus saw a future he'd thought was lost. A new beginning. Marcus stood in the doorway of his new apartment, the key still clutched in his hand. The space was small but clean. A bed, a table, a fridge stocked with food. Sunlight filtered through a window, casting a warm glow on the hardwood floor. He stepped inside, his boots echoing in the quiet, and sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. For 3 years, he'd dreamed of walls, a roof, a place to call his own. Now, it was real. Daniel had left him with a card for a job counselor, promising to check in. Marcus didn't know how to process it, the deed, the kindness, the second chance. He thought of the woman and her baby, wondering if his dollar had really sparked this. Across town, Daniel shared the story with his team, urging them to pay it forward. Marcus spent his first night indoors, sleeping without fear of rain or cold. The next day, he visited the shelter, not for food, but to volunteer, his heart full. He didn't know it yet, but his story was spreading, whispered among volunteers, sparking small acts of kindness across the city. Marcus was no longer invisible. He was a spark, a testament to the power of giving. The ripple effect word of Marcus's story spread like wildfire. A local news outlet picked it up, airing a segment about the homeless man whose last dollar led to a home. Viewers shared it online, comments flooding in from Chicago to Karachi. "This is why kindness matters. I'm crying. This gives me hope." Marcus, unaware of the viral wave, started a job at a community center, using his experience to help others on the streets. Daniel's company launched a program, $1 Forward, funding microgrants for those in need, inspired by Marcus's act. The apartment became more than a home. It was a symbol of what's possible when compassion meets action. Marcus visited the woman he'd helped, learning her name, Lila, and that her baby was thriving. She hugged him, tears in her eyes, calling him her hero. At a city event, Marcus and Daniel stood together, sharing their story, urging others to see the invisible, to give without expecting return. The crowd cheered, but Marcus's quiet smile said it all. Justice had found him, not through wealth or power, but through a single dollar and a stranger's heart. And so, the cycle of kindness continued, proving that even the smallest act could change the world. N.